Hello, this is Professor James Strickler. This is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 11 about public policy. It's Lesson 2 about public policy tools. In this lesson, you'll learn about the public policy process. You'll learn about education and persuasion as a tool of public policy, about taxing and spending incentives as a tool of public policy, about direct regulation as a tool of public policy, and about government takeover as a tool of public policy. So let's begin by building a diagram of the public policy process. We'll start out with the identification of some sort of problem. This is where all public policy begins. Somebody sees something that they don't like, that they think the government should somehow take care of. Let's use an example as we build this model. Imagine that there's a place that every year it gets flooded. There's a big river there, rains come, the downtown gets flooded, and it becomes a very annoying annual problem. Big problem. So what is the next step after identifying that such a problem exists? Next thing you'd have to do is figure out some sort of solution. In other words, formulate a policy to deal with that problem. So, in our example, if the problem is that the city's getting flooded every year, the solution might be, let's build a dam on the river to control the floods. When there's too much rain, too much water, it'll just back up behind the dam and the lake. The city doesn't get flooded anymore. We let out a little bit at a time thereafter and everything's good. Now, that doesn't, though, solve the problem in and of itself. All that's happened is somebody's come up with an idea, a potential way to deal with the problem. They have formulated a policy. To actually bring the policy into being, it must then be enacted in some sort of legal way. There has to be some sort of regulation created, or a law passed, or a court decision rendered, whatever it is. The policy has to be enacted. In the case of our example of a dam, what that means is there would have to be a law passed to build the dam, and money provided in the budget to build the dam. But that in and of itself doesn't get the dam built. Just because Congress said, hey, build a dam on this river, and here's the money to do it, it hasn't actually happened yet. The next step is that the policy must be implemented. In other words, in this example, the dam actually has to be built. Now that may seem really obvious, and you may ask, well, why do we need a separate step for that? Once Congress says we're going to build a dam, of course you go get a dam built. But it's not that easy for other public policy situations. Like, let's say, for example, the concern was about illegal immigrants in America. And so the policy is we deport everybody who's not in the country legally. And we pass a law to do that. Well, actually going out and implementing that policy will be quite difficult, though, with perhaps limited success, depending on what sort of resources and what kind of commitment you make to it. So implementing the policy really is a separate step from enacting it. Enacting it just says you're going to do it. Implementing it is you actually did do it. But that doesn't end the public policy process. There's one more step we have to get to. And that is when you evaluate, did the solution actually work? Did we solve the problem? But it may be more than just did we solve the problem. Let's go back to our example of a dam. Let's say that the dam actually does control the flooding. Hey, the city's downtown isn't getting water soaked every year when there's annual floods. But it has other consequences. Perhaps it causes environmental damage in some way. There are some people that claim that dams inherently do this, and they want to get them off of all our rivers so the rivers go back to being natural. Well, if there is environmental impact, that is one of the results that would be evaluated. Whatever public policy is being sought, whatever solutions are being implemented, at the end you need to look back and say, did it work? And not only did it work, what other consequences came from it? Then as you evaluate the results, you may end up saying, you know what? We need to go back and revisit the solution to this. our solution didn't work, or maybe it only partially worked, or maybe it caused other problems. So in the case of the dam, that might be some people start saying, you know what, the dam was a failure. It caused too much environmental damage, even though it stopped the annual floods. Tear down that dam. Now they could potentially call upon that. So what they're doing is they're looking at a new public policy problem brought up from the old one. We've got environmental damage now. They're proposing a new solution, tear down the dam. Then they'll have to go get that passed in law some way. They'll have to get it implemented. Then they'll evaluate the results, etc. So we can see from this example, and it's true almost always in public policy, that the solution rarely entirely solves the problem. In fact, often it will create additional problems that were unforeseen beforehand. For that reason, the public policy process is never ending. It's just a loop that you go through. You start out with a problem, you try to create a solution, you eventually evaluate how well the solution worked, you realize there's more problems, and you go back to try to solve them now. You're constantly engaging in public policy. The problems just never seem to end. Now, as you're engaging in public policy, as you're trying to find solutions to these problems that are being addressed, there are various tools that are available for the government to use to try to correct them. One of these tools is to simply try to convince people to change in some way. And on the slide you have some examples of the government trying to do this. These are war posters put up around the time of the First and Second World Wars by the United States government, trying to encourage people to behave in certain ways that they weren't behaving already. One of them is encouraging people to plant their old gardens around the time of the First World War in order to have more food available. One of them is encouraging women to go to work to replace the men that are at war during the Second World War. The third one is encouraging men to go enlist in the Navy as a way to impress some women, so that the United States has more sailors in the Navy. The fourth one is encouraging people to stay quiet, to not share things that could end up being secrets used by the enemy. These are all behaviors that the government wants people to engage in, and they're simply trying to encourage them to do it. This is the most subtle, the least heavy-handed of the approaches that government can take. And we're going to call that education or persuasion. This is government using as little of its power as possible to try to get its public policy goals implemented. The next notch up that the government can do is to, in some way, pay somebody to engage in the change they want them into. Now, when I say pay somebody, maybe I mean pay, or maybe I mean not take so much from them. This goes both ways. It can be taking money, giving money. For example, the government might give people a tax credit for buying a fuel-efficient automobile. Or it might give them a tax penalty for not buying health insurance. Now, they aren't ordering people to go buy the car. They aren't ordering people to buy the health insurance. But they're trying to encourage them by making it financially better to choose to do things the way the government wants. So we're going to call this taxing and spending incentives from the government. They are just using money to try to encourage you, to incentivize you to do what they want. But they're not really forcing you yet. You could always choose not to and just lose the money or not get the extra money that they're offering. The next step they can take it up in their heavy-handedness would be to simply order people to behave differently. Here's an example of some real signs that the government has posted where various laws have been passed telling people they can't do certain things, such as campaigning nearing a voting site, or smoking close to the entrance of a building where smoking is prohibited, or not littering, or cleaning up after your dog in the park, things like that. These are all situations where the government has said, hey, people are probably going to engage in certain kinds of behavior on their own that we don't want them to. So we're going to pass a law saying they are not allowed. No longer is it their choice anymore. If they try to choose otherwise, we will punish them automatically. Perhaps take money from them, send them to jail. In the worst case, execute them if it's a bad enough crime that they're committing. This is the next step up. Okay, it's not your choice anymore with us just dangling a little extra money here to try to get you to do the right thing. We're not just merely encouraging you. Now we are ordering you to do what we want. So we're going to call that direct regulation. The government is directly regulating what you are allowed to do or not do. They are not merely encouraging you, they are ordering you. The fourth tool that they can use in public policy is to simply stop waiting for people to change and take over and do the job themselves. So a couple examples are shown on this slide. One would be the creation of public roads. Now, sure, the government could sit back and say, I really wish there were roads there, and if some company wants to build them, maybe we'll cut their taxes or something like that and hope that. No, the government doesn't do that. Instead, the government, generally speaking, if they want a road somewhere, they just decide to build it. Same thing goes for schooling. Yes, private schools exist and people can go to them if they want, but in general, the government has said, schools need to be provided for all children. The private market isn't going to do that. So we are just going to step in and do it ourselves. We're going to hire our own teachers, build our own buildings, and we're going to pass laws requiring people to attend, and we are just going to run the school system for people whether they want us to or not. This kind of tool is just a government takeover. So the government can encourage us to do certain things. They can provide us incentives to do those things. They can directly regulate, in other words, order us to do those things, or they can just simply take over the thing and do it themselves. Those are all potential tools that can be used for public policy. Now let's review what we learned in this lesson. First, when does the public policy process end? Does it end when a public policy is approved or implemented or evaluated, or does it never end? Generally speaking, the public policy process never ends because whatever solution the government comes up with for a problem probably isn't going to entirely solve the problem, or it's going to create other problems that then need to be solved. What is the least coercive public policy tool? Is it an educational advertisement? Is it a tax rebate? Is it criminalizing something? Or is it some sort of refundable fine that they impose upon you? The least coercive public policy tool is to simply educate people, like put an advertisement on TV saying, don't do drugs or something like that. And then hopefully the people will respond to what the government's asking them to do. But they aren't in any way forced to. What is an example of an incentive program? Is it government-made YouTube videos? Is it hiring public school teachers? Is it prison for people smoking weed? Or is it a tax break for buying a hybrid car? An incentive program for the government would be a tax break for buying a hybrid car. This is one potential way to do public policies with an incentive like this. What is an example of a direct regulation? Is it government-made YouTube videos, or hiring public school teachers, or prison for smoking weed, or a tax break for buying a hybrid? Well, it probably isn't that, because we already figured out that that's an incentive. Direct regulation is prison for smoking weed. In other words, the government has said marijuana is illegal, and we're going to throw you in jail if you do it. They are directly regulating your behavior rather than merely encouraging you to do what they want. Finally, what is an example of a government takeover? Is it government-made YouTube videos, hiring public school teachers, prison for smoking weed, or tax breaks for buying a hybrid car? A government takeover is seen in the government hiring public school teachers. Yes, theoretically, the whole educational system could be private. People could hire what teachers they want, take their children to it. The government is simply taking it over, saying, we will set up schools, we will hire the teachers, and we will pass a law requiring you all to go here unless you go someplace else that is approved by us. All right, that completes this lesson. The next lesson will also be from Unit 11. It'll be Lesson 3 about public policy problems.